Hello, I'm Jake Boudreau, civic journalist at Tellil Community Television. This week, on The Record, Nova Scotia Power explains its dynamic line rating project, which includes power lines running to Port Hastings. 2 people were arrested and charged in connection with a collision that claimed the life of a young person. The RCMP is looking for information about a fatal crash that took place earlier this month. A StFX Biology professor is conducting research into bait options for lobster harvesters. Nova Scotians are asked to provide their feedback on the provincial budget. And the Port Hawkesbury Civic Centre will host a safety presentation on November 28th, starting at 8 a.m. But first, the RCMP said it continues to investigate a fatal ATV crash that took place in Richmond County in September. On September 16th at around 10:20 p.m., Richmond County District RCMP responded to a report of an overturned side-by-side and deceased man alongside Buchanan Road. The RCMP said the responding officer identified the victim as a 39-year-old man from Whiteside, and the off-highway vehicle was a blue Can-Am side-by-side. Corporal Carly McCann, the Nova Scotia RCMP's public information officer, wrote in an email that Richmond County District RCMP still has an open investigation related to the incident. McCann wrote that the RCMP Collision Analysis and Reconstruction Services, as well as the Nova Scotia Medical Examiner Service, have also supported the investigation. McCann wrote that the Major Crime Unit is not involved in the investigation because in Nova Scotia, the Medical Examiner Service is responsible for determining the cause and manner of death. Officers have appreciated that multiple witnesses have shared information to support the investigation, McCann wrote. Anyone with information about this incident is asked to call Richmond County District RCMP at 902-226-2533 or contact Nova Scotia Crime Stoppers. With me today is Jill Searle, Director of Control Center Operations at Nova Scotia Power. Welcome.
Thank you, Jake. Nice to be here.
We're going to delve into the dynamic line rating project. So maybe we can start at the beginning. First off, what are the origins of this project? Like when and how did it take shape in the conceptual stage and before being implemented?
Sure. So the dynamic line rating project at Nova Scotia Power is an opportunity for us to deploy line sensors on transmission lines in our province that will help give us some situational awareness and also help understand how much electricity is flowing through our transmission lines, and if there's extra capacity available, gives us the opportunity to utilize that once we have some real-time information from the lines.
Now, according to Nova Scotia Power, this is about helping to enhance the reliability of power service for customers. You kind of alluded to that. So maybe you can get into a little more detail about how this project will meet that goal.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, when we design our transmission lines, we have seasonal ratings because we know obviously it's colder in the winter, warmer in the summer. And depending on our load, our transmission conductors can sag with the heat. And so we design our lines for a certain rating, and then we apply a factor of safety so that we're not at risk of having transmission lines and corridors sagging into trees and things like that. So with the increased amount of renewable energy that'll be coming to the province, specifically intermittent renewables through wind primarily, we want to be able to maximize the use of those transmission lines. So having real-time information from the line sensors will let us see what's actually happening at any given time. It takes into account, temperature, any cooling effects from wind at the time, and it allows us, if there's additional capacity, to be able to use that to flow more energy through those transmission lines.
Now, according to Nova Scotia Power, crews are installing sensors on transmission lines by helicopter. So when is that taking place? Has that started or is that scheduled to take place?
Yes, that has started. We've selected transmission lines across the province that go all the way from Cape Breton through Onslow and to our New Brunswick border, because those are pretty critical transmission lines for us. As you're aware, we have a lot of generation in the Cape Breton area that's coal-based, and a lot of our load is in the metro region. So we want to make sure all the the megawatts that are generated can make it to all of our customers across the province. And we also have an important connection with New Brunswick through our transmission system. So monitoring those transmission lines are really important. The installation by helicopter is actually pretty cool to watch, but it's also something that saves us some time and money in the installation, because the alternative would be to access those locations, which, you know, a transmission line usually cuts right across country through woods, bogs, wetlands. So instead of installing bog mats and mobilizing heavy equipment into those locations across the province, we're able to get there quickly with a helicopter, safely install those line sensors, and do it in a faster rate than if we were trying to access them by land.
Now, how big are these sensors and how do they work?
Yeah, they're about, I'm going to say, foot and a foot and a half wide, and they just clamp onto our transmission lines. They communicate through cellular communications back to our control systems, and they'll provide data on, you know, the temperature, the flow of electricity. They also give us some situational awareness around icing effects or galloping of transmission lines that can cause outages for customers. So we can take some proactive steps when we're aware of those situations developing.
Alluded to this earlier, and these sensors will provide real-time readings on the lines to determine how much energy can safely flow through them, Nova Scotia Power said, noting that the sensors will be able to indicate any changes on or around the lines that may influence how much energy moves through them. Who will be monitoring these lines and how will they be monitored?
That's a great question. So the data from the line sensors will come into our control center, and we have system operators who work around the clock to monitor our grid. Specifically, these line sensors will be monitored by our transmission system operator. So we have a desk that looks specifically at voltages, frequency, and flows on our transmission corridors all across the province. So they will be monitoring that data. And the sensor platform provides the opportunity to flag or alarm for operators if there's situations developing on the transmission lines that they should be looking into immediately.
Nova Scotia Power said the sensors will also help prepare the grid for all the renewable energy that's going to be added to it over the next few years, which you referenced earlier. So what specific renewable energy are you referring to? You mentioned wind. Are we talking solar, tidal? Are we talking other forms of sustainable energy or other forms of energy?
Yeah, the province has put out a plan on how we're going to be off coal and 80% renewable by 2030. There's a number of pieces to that plan. There's a lot of things that have to come together to help enable our grid to transition from a primarily coal-based thermal unit generating to more intermittent wind. And so one of those elements is wind. Right now we have about 600 megawatts of wind installed on our system in Nova Scotia, and we're looking at adding over 1,000 megawatts in the near future and potentially more wind after that. So transitioning our coal units to rely on them less, probably only during winter, and that's after they're converted to an alternative fuel. Having wind that, you know, while somewhat predictable and forecastable, it is intermittent. So we need to have additional systems in on the grid that will help us make up for that difference when the wind's not blowing. So we are building a second transmission line to New Brunswick that will help with reliability of the grid in a future where we have more renewables online. And the independent system operator is also talking about issuing procurement for some fast acting generation that will be able to start up and be online within 10 minutes to help counterbalance when the wind is not available to us.
Now, as you spoke about earlier, sensors are being installed on transmission lines between Onslow and Port Hastings, Onslow and Memramcook, as well as Dalhousie Mountain and Port Hastings. So where exactly will the sensors be located on the lines, and how many sensors will be placed on those lines?
Yeah, we've got about 120 sensors, I believe, that are going to be deployed across those lines. They will be at various locations along the length of those transmission lines. And if you think about some of our transmission corridors, each transmission line has 3 phases. So there'll be a sensor on each of those 3 phases and in multiple transmission lines in a corridor to give a full picture of what the flows through those critical transmission corridors is and what's available to us.
Now, you mentioned that work has started, and how long do you expect that it's going to take to do this?
It should take about a month to do all of the installations. We do require planned outages to those transmission lines during the installation, so to make it safe for the installation. So we coordinate those outages around considering reliability of the grid. So for example, fortunately, Hurricane Melissa is going to miss us, but having hurricanes in the forecast may change our schedule a bit, but the hope is to have them all installed within a month.
Yeah, and without knowing exactly when you're going to be able to have those outages, I assume you guys are going to let the public know, as you normally do, that an outage is planned. And how long would these outages take place?
So the outages that we're planned in our transmission system actually don't impact customers. We have redundancy in our system, and so we plan it around when the grid is reliable and can operate without the redundancy of the line that we're taking out. So customers will not experience outages as part of this installation program.
So I understand that Nova Scotia is the first utility in Atlantic Canada to use these sensors. So why did you decide to be the first, and where else have they used these types of sensors?
Yeah, these sensors have been deployed in other jurisdictions. We are the first in Atlantic Canada, but talking to my colleagues at New Brunswick Power and Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro, they are also considering deploying line sensors. There's a number of reasons they would do it. There's some compliance obligations for us. Being interconnected in the North American grid, there's standards that we have to operate to, and that involves understanding the current ratings of your transmission lines. So that work is driving sensor installation across the province, or sorry, across the country and in all of North America. But with our accelerated move to increase renewables on our grid, that is one of the drivers of why we're going forward with the dynamic line rating project. Sorry, right now, other Newfoundland and both Newfoundland and New Brunswick Power, while they have wind on their system, do not have the penetration of wind or the proportion of wind that we do. So that is why we're trying this out first, and they are very interested in our results.
Now, to your knowledge, are there other projects being planned in the near, fairly distant future of this nature that you guys are looking at in preparation for some of the sustainable energy and some of the other projects that are coming online or are planned?
Yes, I do expect, I know Newfoundland is looking very seriously at installing dynamic line rating sensors. New Brunswick is just evaluating at this point. We do have a little bit of experience within Nova Scotia Power from line sensor projects in the past. We would have deployed line sensors on our distribution network in association with an intelligent feeder battery project that we did a few years ago involving batteries and some local wind generation. But this is a much larger scale project and has a bit of a different output for us, where it's actually evaluating available real-time capacity on our transmission lines.
The only other question I'd have is, you're involved in this project. Are there other projects that you're going to be involved with coming up soon from Nova Scotia Power that of this nature or of a different nature taking place here in the province?
Yeah, this is our only line sensor project that we have on the go right now, but we are looking at covering the whole province, or at least our most critical transmission corridors with it. So our intention is to have the line sensors installed and the data flowing before the end of the year, so that we're able to start assessing the viability. Should additional transmission lines be built, for example, our intertie to New Brunswick, it's a few years out, but when it is being built, we will be deploying DLR, dynamic line rating sensors, on that new transmission build in the future, and any potential new transmission would have it as well.
2 people were arrested and charged in connection with a fatal collision on Highway 104. Antigonish County District RCMP said they arrested a 41-year-old man and a youth, both from Afton. The two will face charges of failing to stop after an accident resulting in death, the RCMP said, noting that the man is also charged with obstructing justice. The RCMP said they are scheduled to appear in Antigonish Provincial Court at a later date. On November 1st at around 9:50 p.m., the RCMP said a collision took place on Highway 104 near Dagger Woods Road and Pomcat Monks Head Road between an SUV and a larger vehicle. The RCMP said the 4 occupants of a Toyota RAV4 were transported to hospital by EHS, and one passenger, a youth, was pronounced deceased at the hospital. The other vehicle involved was confirmed to be a farm vehicle, the RCMP said. Through the investigation, officers determined the farm vehicle was driven by a youth, the RCMP said. The farm vehicle did not remain at the scene, but was located shortly afterwards, the RCMP said. The investigation is ongoing, and no further information will be released at this time, the RCMP added. Antigonish County District RCMP thanks the public for offering tips and assisting with this investigation. On November 4th at around 7:40 a.m., Victoria County District RCMP, Fire Services, and EHS responded to a motor vehicle crash on Highway 105 near Patterson Road and Boularderie East. The RCMP said its officers determined that a red or burgundy Ford F-150 truck left the road and came to rest in a deep ditch on the eastbound side of the highway. The RCMP said the driver, a 48-year-old man from Boularderie, was the only person in the truck and was pronounced deceased at the scene. The RCMP said investigators want to speak with anyone who was traveling on Highway 105 during the late night of November 3rd or early morning of November 4th and may have seen the truck. The RCMP believes the truck was traveling west on Highway 105, possibly having started from Sydney on November 3rd. Anyone with information is asked to call Victoria County District RCMP at 902-295-2350 or contact Nova Scotia Crime Stoppers. With me is the chair of the StFX Biology Department. Welcome, Dr. Russell Wyeth.
Thanks.
So I understand you studied lobster bait and behavior for almost 12 years. So what originally drew you to this field?
A couple things. One was that, of course, it's a very important species in the Maritimes in Nova Scotia, and we do like to have the science that we do be relevant to the communities around us. So you have this conversations with people at the market or in the pub, and if you're talking about something that matters to the livelihoods of people, it creates a good connection between what the university does and the people that live here. So that's one part. The other part is that I'm a marine invertebrate zoologist, so I study creepy, crawly, slimy critters under the ocean, and lobsters are pretty obvious around here. So I would go diving, and lobsters are abundant in the waters around here. And I had a colleague, Jim Williams, who had sort of similar interests in lobster, and we just started sort of naturally talking about the kinds of behaviors that they would do and the value of doing some study of those behaviors. And it was sort of a great collaboration. So we work well together, and you so that sort of circumstance aspect of it also, and the sort of the interest was another reason why we started working with them.
Yeah, you just mentioned Dr. Jim Williams, who you're working with, and maybe you can talk about his role in this research project.
So originally, Jim and I worked very closely on a project looking at the first alternative bait for the lobster fishery that we tested, and so it was very much a collaboration. We had we built a sort of a mini lab out at Arisag Harbor, and literally Jim and one of my students, or our students, built the building and set up the swimming pool pump that brought the water into the tanks that we were using in there. And so he was fully involved from the outset with that one, and we supervised the students together. We did troubleshooting on the video together. We cursed the lobster when they were difficult together, and then of course once the data started arriving, we did all of the analysis together, and that sort of set the seeds for then me starting to interact with lobster harvesters and their associations. And then Jim retired, and so his involvement diminished. He's enjoying retirement, so the major project that we've just been working on, he was involved, I guess, in a sort of a advisory role at sort of in the lead up to it, but the actual doing of that science, he was less directly involved with.
Now, you were undertaking research looking into finding sustainable bait for lobster harvesters, which arose after community interactions with those harvesters about the cost of bait. And you mentioned you and Dr. Williams looked into and determined that bait options are diminishing and prices are on the way up. Now, I understand that some bait stocks are waning to the extent that Fisheries and Oceans Canada has to limit some fisheries. In fact, they called a halt to them at the end of the summer into the fall. Maybe you can talk about that state of the species and the stocks.
Right. So I should be clear, that's not my particular expertise, and I would very much defer to the experts on fish stocks about what's the best, what's best for them in terms of management. But clearly, the lobster fishery has a vulnerability to the sustainability of the fisheries that catch the bait the lobster fishery uses. So, and this has been recognized by the Marine Stewardship Council, the MSC, that certifies fisheries as sustainable. And then, of course, it's also recognizable in the market forces that affect bait costs, right? So the bait system is very distributed. There's all sorts of different sources for baits, and the buying of that bait, of course, depends on the availability of that bait, and prices can go up if the availability is reduced. And so the key here is you don't want to be disrupting the ecosystem. You don't want to disrupt the ecosystem in a way that is going to harm the whole ecosystem by taking bait from that ecosystem and feeding it to lobster as you're catching them. And so that's just there's that sort of regardless of the actual state of the stocks. You want to be cautious about that. And then when the people, DFO, when their Department of Fisheries and Oceans, when they come in and say, we're concerned about the state of this particular stock, and that stock is being used at least partially to support the bait for the lobster fishery, that then becomes a real concern, right? Because then you've got the situation where it's possible that the bait that is being used by the lobster fishery is going to be fished in a way that could harm the very ecosystem that supports the lobsters in nature.
And yet, there is a need to have this bait for the lobster fishermen, especially certain species like I'm thinking, for instance, mackerel seems to be a highly effective form of bait for them because of the properties of the mackerel, and it's needed and essential in their fishery.
Yeah, so there's lots of varying opinions of what are the best baits, and particularly depending on where you go, there will be lots of different baits that are the favorites. But consistently, mackerel and herring are ones that harvesters will talk about as being a good bait, and that they, at least traditionally, some time ago, that would have been the bait they were using. And those also happen to be the stocks that DFO has been flagging and as of concern in some fashion, and in some cases restricting how much of them that can be caught. So yeah, you've got this sort of opposition between the simple choice for the harvesters would be, well, okay, you know, the mackerel or the herring are the ones that we know tend to work well. And what DFO is saying, no, we can't really catch those in the same way that we were in the past.
You noted that this is a difficult problem to address, and there's no one organization that's devoted specifically to bait. So should there be an organization in charge of this, or do you think that would be effective?
So that's a really great question, and I think there absolutely needs to be discussion about what is the best way to manage bait. I'm not sure I would go immediately to say there should be an organization. I would definitely want to talk to the people involved at all various different levels. My impression, I don't actually have a lobster fishing license, but my impression from conversations, and I've read some of the language, is that there is very little regulation of bait. And that does mean that if there is a need for a concerted change across the lobster fishery about which baits are being used, it's not entirely clear how that could happen, right? There's a lot of individual, smaller groups or individual involvement in this process about who's acquiring bait and supplying it, who's actually using the bait. And there currently isn't a very clear system to shift the general use away from certain baits or towards other baits. So my view is that there definitely should be some substantial and hopefully substantial discussions and hopefully action towards a more concerted approach to bait. I definitely believe that. I don't know if that lands entirely on DFO or the harvesters. Maybe it's a combination. That would probably be best. I do also think that there should be an approach that is looking at more systematic testing of alternative baits, because that's a whole other extra problem here. Is you can recognize that the baits that are being used right now are not the best, but what are you going to replace them with? And that, I do think some systematic approaches to testing would be really valuable.
That brings me to my next question. You spoke with harvesters and harvester organizations, and after getting funding, tested a wide variety of baits. So what type of baits did you test, and how did each of those perform in the testing phase?
Right. So over the course of the project, we tested approximately 40 different kinds of bait. And that included traditional baits, because we would want to have that for comparison. We actually tested natural prey, and that was to verify that our system that we were using to test the baits was working similarly to the way the fishery works. So fishermen use those traditional baits because they catch lots of lobster, and the implication of that, of course, is that those baits are more attractive to the lobster than natural prey, because otherwise they wouldn't be caught with them. And so we validated that. We showed that our system for measuring the lobster interest in baits absolutely showed that they were more interested in traditional baits than natural prey. And then on top of those, we also tested approximately 25 what we'll call as possible alternative baits. So these are just sources of protein primarily that we would possibly consider putting in a lobster trap. And that included particularly byproducts of either terrestrial systems. So, for example, byproducts from chicken slaughtering, or alternatively seafood byproducts. So we were able to source things like the heads of shrimp. So of course, when we catch shrimp for a fishery, it's only the tails that are used and the heads are discarded. And so we tested shrimp heads also. And then in addition to those two options, we also tested some specifically designed prototype baits. There are some companies that are attempting to fill this possible need for the fishery by designing alternative baits, and we tested a number of those also. And what worked best? Well, the first thing I would say is that there is no real one bait that worked best. There was a lot of baits that lobsters were really quite interested in. And this is, from a biological standpoint, not very surprising, because lobsters' natural diet is really wide. They'll eat a variety of things. The term is omnivore. They were really quite interested in many of those different baits that we were testing, and often to a comparable level as the traditional herring and mackerel. Those good baits the lobster fishermen have already figured out work really well. Sort of overall, the seafood byproduct baits and those alternative prototype baits that were being produced by companies that had seafood byproducts in them tended to be the ones that were comparable or even maybe slightly better than the traditional baits. The terrestrial byproducts, a few of them worked quite well, but some of them didn't work quite as well. And maybe that's not very surprising, right? There's a real sort of natural link between scavenging lobster being attracted to the carcasses of seafood that was in nature. And if you start using those as bait, it's not surprising the lobsters are really quite interested in them.
So I understand that the project lasted about 4 years, and you're still working your way through the data. How much data are we talking about here?
A ridiculous amount, I guess, is the way to put it. When people hear about the 8,000 hours of video we have from the ocean floor that allowed us to do this analysis, there's a number of reactions, one of which is that people tend to be concerned about my students who worked on this. And I reassure them that we had a system in place where it was a lot of work, but it was not a ridiculous amount of work, and we spread it out and shared it amongst us. And they did a lot of counting of lobsters. It's something that we figured out. This is one of the things at the first stage of the analysis here, we've really figured out this system really does work, and it is with a reasonable amount of labor, not a small amount of labor, but a reasonable amount of labor is a great way to test the responsiveness of lobsters to different baits. And that approach, okay, I think is important because, and the fact that we got so much data is important because we are able to tell the difference between the attractiveness of baits that are both attractive to lobsters, right? It's a matter of gradations here. Like some baits are really interesting, and others are really, really interesting to lobsters. And by getting that large data set, we actually have the ability, in some cases, to tell that difference. And that's, I think, going to be important for harvesters because they are, I don't think, going to be comfortable with baits that are not tested thoroughly. I think an important aspect of our study was the large amount of data that allowed us to tell relatively fine differences between baits. So this is, I think, going to be important going ahead with harvesters, they are interested in finding really good baits and being able to refine choices or recipes based on a system that can tell the small differences between baits, I think is going to be really important. And we basically, by doing this large study with all the data we gathered, we verified we can actually do that using our video system.
So far, researchers have published one paper, and there are 2 papers left in the pipeline, which are months away, I believe. So what goes into these papers? How long do they typically take to complete?
That can vary a lot. So there's, and I will say there's probably more than just the 3 that we're talking about here total. But we have the first one is dealt with. We've got 2 or 3 coming up, and there are the possibility of more beyond that. The amount of time, of course, depends on, for example, in this case, counting all those lobsters in the video. And that's kind of just, you got to get through that, and it'll take a certain amount of time. The amount of time that follows after that can vary widely because it depends on the complexity of the analysis. We do a lot of work to make sure that their measurements are accurate. And we also need to do a lot of careful work to make sure that random events are not driving what we think are the results. So you can imagine that just by chance, a few more lobsters might show up in response to one bait versus another bait. And so we got to do a variety of things to make sure that that kind of sort of random circumstance isn't driving our conclusions. And sometimes that kind of analysis can be really quite quick because we know what we're dealing with. Other times we can, it's much more of a step-by-step and go back a few steps process to say, that's probably not going to work that way. We've got to do the analysis in a different way. So I would say the next few sort of steps are going to be faster than the last one. Like the last one took a couple years for us to really nail it all down, but we've figured a lot of that stuff out now. And so the next 2 are going to follow in much quicker succession. So as you suggest, months away. That doesn't actually stop us from sharing information. What it does do, though, is there's this process of scientific peer review where other scientists will comment on our work. And that is where the assurance of, this was a quality analysis comes from, is getting it through that process. And so we're sort of in the final stages of getting through that and over the next year for most of the results here.
So over the next year, that's going to be what you guys are going to be working on, and that's the stage you're at currently.
Yes, so over the next year, we're working to get those out. I'm also keen to explore this possibility of creating a testing service for the fishery. This is just an idea at this point. I'm trying to gauge interest, but my view is that in the long run, over the next 10 years, maybe longer, the fishery would really benefit from shifting away from using wild caught fish, whether it's herring, mackerel, or others, as bait, and moving more towards a bait system that relies on byproducts from other seafood industries and possibly terrestrial industries also. If that difference between the baits can be figured out and solved. I think the long-term sustainability and assessment of the sustainability of the fishery to a certain extent depends on the sustainability of the bait fisheries. And if the entire industry can do that shift, that I think would be something that would be really beneficial. And of course, that needs to still be a working fishery. The baits need to work well. And that's where a testing service that would use our system for testing, and there's some others also that have been suggested by other researchers that would be very good options for testing bait also, but that sort of provided that testing service that the companies that are trying to develop baits could take advantage of, because if they're all independently trying to do their own testing, it's almost certainly going to be far more costly for them to do that. We have a system, we have the expertise, and if there can be some pooling of resources to do collective testing, that's probably going to be beneficial for those people trying to develop baits. And of course, harvesters could then be looking at a situation where they can see hopefully some scientific, ideally unbiased comparison of baits, and get some more assurances that if they are going to shift away from using traditional baits, that the baits they're shifting to are actually going to work reasonably well.
Now, you said the research included an extraordinary group of students who worked on the project over the years, and you said the project would not have been possible without them or the harvesters who helped out. Now, I assume these are StFX Biology students you're talking about. And how large was the group, and what were they responsible for?
Right. So the field work involved 3 summers of intensive field work, plus some extra on sort of the before summer and the after summer. So multiple summers, and each summer there would be 4 students working on this project, and they were all students at StFX or StFX and Memorial University, as sort of a co-supervised arrangement, and they ranged from PhD and master's graduate students whose primary responsibility is doing the research to support their graduate program, and then also a number of undergraduate students who would work with the graduate students on the project, and again, they were using the data that came out of the project in various different ways to support their academic programs. And what did they do? Almost everything. I helped coordinate things, but this is one of the things I really try to do, is support the independent development of the students as scientists themselves. And a great way to do that is just have them do everything. So with the project funded, they were able to go out and source some of these baits. So they would go and collect the various different things we were trying to test themselves. They would get the baits ready. They helped design and build the video camera tripods that we were using as part of this process. They would do the work in the summers, going out on the harvesters' boats, and that's something very important to acknowledge here. Not just students, but we had a lot of help from harvesters. Their boats were the ones that carried the video tripods out for us to then deploy. And so the students got to go out on the boats to do that, which of course in May is not quite as comfortable as it is in late July and August, but they would do it regardless. And then doing the analysis of the video, and then managing the data and generating all of the analyses of the data. That again is the students, where I play a very much an advisory and support role. Which I'm more than happy to do. It's really great to see how they engage and grow with the projects.
The provincial government is inviting Nova Scotians to share their suggestions on what should be in the 2026-2027 budget and what should not. John Lohr, Minister of Finance and the Treasury Board, said the next provincial budget will be about growing the economy and addressing the deficit. The Finance Minister said they will be making decisions that will allow his government to do both. Lohr said the province wants to hear Nova Scotians' ideas about how to build a stronger economy, one that helps more Nova Scotians get good jobs and generate money to support needed services. The province said people can submit suggestions by emailing budget@novascotia.ca. mailing the Department of Finance and Treasury Board, attention budget engagement, at P.O. Box 187, Halifax, Nova Scotia, B3J 2N3. Or the public can provide suggestions to their MLA. The province said the deadline for submissions is December 12th. According to the province, the 2025-2026 budget update in September included a $1.2 billion deficit, $18.1 billion in expenses, $503 million higher than budget estimates, and $16.5 billion in revenue, $44.9 million lower than budget estimates. The Safety First and Cape Breton Network, in collaboration with the Nova Scotia Department of Labour, Skills and Immigration, the Workers' Compensation Board of Nova Scotia, and the Cape Breton Partnership, is hosting a presentation entitled Safety in the Strait, Learn at Breakfast, The Evolution of Safety, which is taking place on Friday, November 28th at the Port Hawkesbury Civic Centre. The morning will include a hot breakfast, network opportunities, updates from the Department of Labour, Skills and Immigration, and WCB Nova Scotia, followed by an interactive keynote from Callum McPhee, safety specialist with Learn Corp International, as well as a roundtable discussion. This year's event marks the third annual Safety in the Strait event hosted by the Safety First and Cape Breton Network, which aims to bring together employers, employees, and community partners to share best practices, strengthen safety culture, and support continuous improvement across the Strait area and beyond. Tyler Mathis, President and CEO of the Cape Breton Partnership, said it is proud to collaborate to bring important conversations like this to the business community. Mathis said a strong safety culture benefits everyone. It protects people, strengthens organizations, and supports a resilient regional economy. The morning's presentation will include 2 complementary modules of safety thinking and culture delivered by Callum McPhee of Learn Corp International. This presentation will trace the journey from the early days of industry to today's high reliability organizations, highlighting how modern safety culture is built on resilience, learning, psychological safety, and a just culture that empowers everyone to be part of the solution. McPhee said safety is evolving beyond compliance. It's about understanding how work really happens and empowering people to make it safer every day. McPhee said this session will explore how organizations can shift from reacting to incidents to learning from success and everyday operations. The Cape Breton Partnership is a private sector-led economic development organization that supports companies and entrepreneurs by promoting the island as a great place to live, work, and invest, growing a culture that values and celebrates creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and connects entrepreneurs and companies to the resources they need to succeed. The Safety First and Cape Breton Network was formed by a group of health and safety leaders in 2012 to help address business needs and improve workplace health and safety culture. The Safety First and Cape Breton Network is an island-wide initiative that supports the importance of a strong health and safety culture in workplaces, provides opportunities to network and engage with other safety practitioners, and learning opportunities to help enhance HSC programs across Cape Breton. Thank you for watching. Please tune in again to find out what we will be talking about on The Record.